Chapter 1: Shadows on the Ice. The evening air was sharp with winter's embrace as it cut across the Zürich outskirts, whispering among the steel and glass of the ice arena like a whetted blade. Under the bright floodlights, the sheen of the rink promised a night of passion and rivalry, a spectacle for the gathering throngs eager for the clash of skates and sticks. Yet behind this facade of athletic chivalry, Jonas Keller knew, lurked shadows deep and malignant. Jonas stood at the entrance of the arena, a quiet silhouette against the bustling crowd. As spectators chatted animatedly, their breath visible in the icy air, his mind was elsewhere, on the spreadsheets and financial reports waiting back at his apartment, each entry an echo of something far more sinister. A whistle cracked through the air, ushering the teams from their locker rooms to the ice, pulling Jonas from his thoughts. He recalled the chill he'd felt on discovering those financial inconsistencies. They weren't errors, they were deliberate deceptions, as precise as a skater's blade on ice. Jonas's meticulous nature wouldn't let the matter rest, much to the chagrin of his superiors. He adjusted his scarf against the biting cold and made his way inside, weaving between fans clad in team colors. While the world watched the game, Jonas continued his own line, invisible but resolute, a current beneath placid waters. Deep beneath the arena, far from the roar of the crowd, the locker rooms were a hive of activity. The clatter of equipment and the pungent tang of liniment filled the air. Jonas had finagled his way through the security measures, his worn janitor's uniform, acquired through somewhat unorthodox means, allowing him access as he carried a toolbox conspicuously marked repairs. He was here to gather more intel, something concrete. The club's management looked the other way with alarming regularity, and he had to know why. He moved swiftly, yet unobtrusively, his eyes searching for the office he had previously located on the arena's schematics. As he reached the financial office door, ajar and casting a rectangle of light on the polished floor, his heart hammered against his ribs. "Who are you?" The voice was sharp, almost electric, and Jonas instinctively tensed. He turned, forcing a benign smile onto his face, meeting the gaze of a young player, Tobias Rein, if he wasn't mistaken, one of the rising stars with a gleam of opportunism in his eyes. "Just here to fix the light," Jonas replied, holding up the toolbox as though it were a shield. "Heard it was flickering." Tobias's eyes lingered, flicking from Jonas to the toolbox and back again. The pause stretched the air taut between them while the distant commentary on the rink filled the silence. "Right," Tobias finally said, a shade of indifference painting his features. "Do it quickly, though. They get jumpy about who they let down here." As Jonas nodded, Tobias turned away, retreating towards the players' lockers. Jonas watched him go, a sliver of unease lingering. The player's demeanor hadn't disclosed any threats, yet something in his eyes resembled understanding. Shaking off this intuition, Jonas returned to the task at hand. Everything needed to be gathered methodically. The office was impeccably neat, files lined up with military precision. Here, he would find what pieces fit and which did not. By line items bleeding money, the consultants who consulted nothing, and the sponsors who sold not goods but chaos. Carefully, quietly, Jonas delved into the drawers, photographing documents with a surreptitiously modified phone. A faint click, a rush of adrenaline, the fear of footsteps, all became part of his symphony of precautions. But amidst this tension, what he hadn't anticipated was leaving part of himself there. His wallet, innocuously dropped in the rush when he heard the corridors creak. The Overlook Café was a haven of warmth and serenity, with its panoramic views of Lake Zürich through frosted glass, bathed in the gentle hue of the evening's blush. Here, Jonas met Detective Inspector Sarah Meier, their usual table by the window looking out over a landscape that seemed as transient and deceptive as their investigation. Sarah was already seated, nursing a cup of coffee that steamed heavily in the dim light. She was a striking figure, her calm demeanor belying the storm of determination that Jonas had come to appreciate. She met his approach with a nod, her eyes narrowing, seeing beyond the surface consequences to the heart of his endeavor. "You're late," she said, her voice carrying the cadence of unshed frustration and the weariness of battling unseen forces. "Almost got caught," he admitted, sliding into the seat across from her. Jonas relayed his findings, the figures that formed a pattern of deceit, the name he'd seen linked too often to the dark numbers, someone high in the club's hierarchy, always whispered but never named like a specter. Sarah sipped her coffee, absorbing his words. "They're smarter than we give them credit for, but this can help push some of the right buttons. We need more, something indisputable." Her gaze drifted out to the frozen lake, her reflection wavering in the window. Jonas followed her line of sight, imagination playing murmurations of smoke and mirrors over the pristine ice. He recognized her struggle, her position wedged between those who demanded allegiance to silence and her own unyielding integrity. "The more I dig, the more I fear reaching the other end," Jonas confessed. "These are powerful people and they're watching. They've made it clear after after what happened." Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. "We won't let that happen again. Not to you, Jonas. We're in this together," she vowed, her voice steely yet warm. Jonas could only nod, the chill gripping his heart now warmer with shared purpose. They sat a little longer, letting silence companion their thoughts while the cafe around them hummed gently, cradling their resolve. In the heart of Zürich's business district, where the city's pulse beat unchecked among soaring towers of glass, Jonas Keller saw the world through the eyes of an outsider inside his own life. He wove through the foot traffic until he found himself before the building that attended to the affairs of his recent discovery. It was curious how he'd come to associate places with the network of transactions he had uncovered. This was where strings were pulled, behind the mirrored facades and polished surfaces. His next step was riskier, a calculated move that required discretion as much as evidence. Inside, the air was rich with power, a testament to the high-stakes games played under the guise of corporate normalcy. Jonas knew he had to tread lightly, his role precariously balanced between unwelcome investigator and very necessary whistleblower. He navigated towards a familiar face, an insider who had fed him tidbits and whispers from within the club's sanctum. A slender figure intercepted his path. Nervous energy made them glance around before one handshake cemented their unspoken pact, steering him towards a secluded conference room. The room was reminiscent of every other Jonas had seen, minimalist design and opulent detailing, made to intimidate and impress in equal measure. As his contact handed him a slim envelope containing compiled data, Jonas sensed a shift, a crack in the edifice as significant as it was minute. "This will help," the insider whispered, their voice a mere suggestion of sound, as though speaking too loudly would fracture the fragile walls around them. Jonas nodded, bearing the weight of gratitude and responsibility simultaneously. They didn't speak further, parting ways with the understanding that their shared path towards truth was fraught with danger. His steps back through the district were brisk, fueled by the dread of one more round of subterfuge, a game out of his control, yet crucial to him. As he approached the exit, the unease that had built swelled into a palpable presence. The envelope burgeoned with secrets, and secrets, Jonas knew, were never without cost. Back in his apartment, Jonas spread the latest of his findings across the cluttered corkboard, meticulously outlined like the forest of pins and strings that illustrated his expanding yet claustrophobic reality. Each line traced another understanding of the scale and depth of corruption he had unearthed. The warmth of water boiled on the stove provided scant comfort, his mind troubled by the potential fallout looming over them. The phone rang, shattering his contemplative silence. The number was unfamiliar. The voice that spoke was a dissonant chord, recognizable only by the inflection of menace disguised as formality. "Mr. Keller, you've been very thorough, but I must remind you, the ice is thin where you tread." A pit hollowed beneath Jonas's sternum, the reality of exposure, of pursuit, striking him with all the subtlety of a striking puck. This voice was directly linked to the murky abyss he had plunged into. As the call ended, Jonas sat heavily, the walls of his apartment closing in like an enigma turned malevolent. He stared at the corkboard, visions of fractured futures and relentless truths colluding silently. The choice was his, to pursue or retreat, but both paths inevitably led through darkness. A decision postponed, suspended on the precipice of hardship met and sacrifices demanded. Somewhere far above the serene surface of the frozen lake that held this city in abeyance, the sound of skates and sticks echoed. In Jonas's mind, they clashed not in sport, but battle, a battle where the score meant everything and lives stood poised on the ledger. The wind howled, a banshee racing down the streets of Zürich, singing its story of cold and foreboding. Jonas Keller stood at the window, watching as flurries danced against the pane, wondering what the next storm would be. He was resolute, his purpose shared now with Sarah, his singular ally. Neither knew for certain if they would uncover the truth, but for Jonas, there was no turning back now, only forward into the widening gyre where secrets twisted and shadows waited. The game had only just begun, and it promised to play out beyond the rink, beyond the reaches of their understanding, into the very heart of the beast. With this resolve, Jonas turned back to his board, the harbinger of the fight ahead. Chapter 2: Shadows of the Past. The cavernous expanse of the ice arena loomed like an icy fortress under the stark winter sky. Its polished steel and glass facade reflected the scattered clouds and towering pines that encircled Lake Zürich. Inside, the acoustics of absence reigned supreme. The arena was empty save for the distant echoes of maintenance staff attending to the ice beneath its rows of deserted seats. Jonas Keller stood at center ice, staring up at the empty bleachers. In his mind, he could hear the roar of the crowd, the sharp slap of sticks on puck, and the scrape of skates across the frosty surface. But today, the arena was silent. He adjusted the collar of his coat against the chill and glanced at the clipboard in his hand, numbers and figures far from adding up. This place feels different without the noise, doesn't it? The voice of Thomas Lutz, the club's vice president, interrupted Jonas's thoughts, bringing him back to the matters at hand. Lutz's shoes clicked on the tiles as he approached, his expression unreadable beneath the sophistication of his black wool coat. Jonas nodded, offering a polite smile. Indeed, it's almost like a cathedral, isn't it? Or a mausoleum, Lutz countered with a quirk of his eyebrow. You're here early. I thought you'd be in the finance office chasing papers. Already have, Jonas replied, tapping the sheaf of printouts. But I'm trying to understand the scale of it all. You've noticed the discrepancies, I take it. Lutz's tone was as benign as his outward demeanor, but Jonas knew better than to take his words at face value. Yes, and I'm hoping to clear it up, Jonas said, choosing his words carefully. Lutz laughed, briefly stifled as it echoed eerily in the empty arena. Good luck with that. Before Jonas could probe further, Lutz turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Jonas alone in the silent cathedral of ice and dreams. Jonas watched him leave, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. The Overlook Cafe was a quaint refuge from the biting cold, nestled on a hill with sweeping views of Lake Zürich's crystalline expanse. Its warmth was a stark contrast to the chill outside, the air inside carrying the aromatic symphony of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked pastries. Jonas sat near the frosted window, his eyes scanning the horizon, lost in thought. Sarah Meier, detective inspector and well acquainted with both the cafe and Jonas, approached, a cup of steaming brew in her hand. She slid into the seat opposite him, her presence bringing a quiet intensity to the ambience. Jonas, she said, wrapping her hands around the cup to absorb its warmth. You're hard to pin down lately. Late mornings and earlier nights, Jonas replied, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The audit's been keeping me busy." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Busy with what exactly?" "I've come across irregularities," Jonas admitted, lowering his voice. "Missing funds, suspicious transactions, and it seems the club's management isn't too keen on explaining them away." Sarah sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "Do you have any idea why? Who might be involved?" "A few names, but without solid evidence, it's just speculation. You know how it is." "More than you think," she said, a hint of veiled frustration in her voice. "I've been running into walls too, pressured to leave certain cases alone. It's aggravating." Their eyes met, a mutual understanding transpiring silently. The systems they operated within, the secrets they sought to uncover, these threads wove them together, both of them dancing near the edge of something bigger, something perilous. "Be careful, Jonas," Sarah warned, her voice a mixture of concern and determination. "You're poking a bear that's been asleep for a long time." Jonas nodded, acutely aware of the invisible weight pressing down upon him. "I know, but if I've learned anything, it's that some things need to be stirred." "Keep me in the loop," Sarah said, her voice steady. "If anyone can help, you know where to find me." The exchange sealed not only their conversation, but a tacit alliance, a shared resolve in the face of an unpredictable storm brewing around them. The interior of Jonas Keller's apartment was as warm and inviting as the man himself appeared to be, filled with personal touches that belied the meticulous research scattered across every surface. The corkboard mounted on the wall served as a collage of newspaper clippings, photographs, and maps pinned with colored strings, a constantly evolving tapestry that spoke of secrets yet to be revealed. Jonas picked up his latest find, an anonymous tip printed on a nondescript sheet of paper, cryptic in its brevity, and pinned it next to a series of names and connections that stretched across the board. His phone buzzed ominously on the coffee table, its digital face illuminating with a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before answer. "Ing. Jonas Keller." There was a pause, then a woman's voice taut with urgency. "You need to stop investigating those transactions. They're watching you." "Who is this?" Jonas demanded, his heart skipping a beat as he rose from his seat. "You don't need to know," the voice replied tersely, "but drop it or else." The call ended abruptly, leaving Jonas standing in the middle of his apartment, the sudden silence echoing ominously. He stared at the phone, knowing the stakes had just been raised. His instincts warned him that he now teetered on the precipice of danger, a shadowy world of crime and corruption, inching closer with each step he took toward the truth. But he couldn't back down now. He looked up at the board, eyes tracing the web of connections he had painstakingly assembled. Each line was more than a link. It was a new avenue, a potential piece of the puzzle. The silence that followed the call seemed to fill the room, gnawing at him, urging him on. He clenched his fists, a steely resolve taking root where uncertainty had been. "Bring it on," he muttered into the empty apartment, a declaration of war against the shadows lurking in the lightless corners of the world he had stumbled upon. As he resumed his work, sifting through another series of transactions, his mind spun with possibilities and the inevitable showdown that lay ahead. The pieces were falling into place, but the full picture was far from clear, a puzzle yet unsolved, a story not yet written, but with every reason to be told. And as the night enveloped the city outside his window, Jonas Keller knew that as the stakes increased, so too did the necessity for truth, whatever the cost. The icy crime demanded nothing less. Chapter 3: Shadows on Ice. The crisp evening air hung heavy over the ice arena, its modern steel and glass facade reflecting the dull glow of Zürich's city lights. Though the arena buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming game, there was an undercurrent of tension in the normally boisterous atmosphere. Inside, beneath the skater's domain and the cheers of over 12,000 fans. The truths and secrets of a murky world lay entangled in the depths of the arena's financial heart. Jonas Keller stood alone in one of the corridors beneath the rink, his heart racing as he reviewed the spreadsheets clutched in his hand. These figures, these seemingly innocuous numbers, had drawn him into a labyrinth of intrigue. His fingers skimmed over the complex columns of data, each entry a whisper of something far larger. He had to find Sarah before the game began. The stakes were higher than any personal risk now. The future of the entire ice hockey club hung by a thread. The Overlook Café, nestled quietly on a hill with a sweeping view over Lake Zürich, provided a stark contrast to the bustling urban landscape below. The café's warmth was inviting, its walls lined with warmly lit wooden beams and rustic tables, casting long shadows as the winter sun slipped behind the lake's frozen edges. Jonas found Sarah Meier seated in a corner booth, her fingers laced around a mug of steaming coffee. The exhaustion of her battles with bloated bureaucracies lay etched on her face, but her eyes burned with an undeterred resolve. "Jonas," she greeted, motioning to the seat across from her. "Any news?" He slid into the booth, his mind racing. "I have the final pieces, Sarah, but it's dangerous. They've been watching my every move. I don't know how much longer we can keep this under wraps." She nodded, her expression pensive. "We're getting close, aren't we? Too close for them to ignore." Their conversation was a dance of guarded phrases, punctuated by sips of coffee and cautious glances at the other patrons. Here, in this moment of reprieve, the weight of the conspiracy they unraveled intertwined with the solitude of the café, creating a kind of sanctuary against the snow-clad reality outside. Jonas handed her the data. "Look at these transactions," he urged, lowering his voice. "They connect the club's management with offshore accounts and money laundering. It's more than just betting scandals." "And Tobias Rein's involvement?" Sarah inquired, her interest piqued, recalling the subplot they'd unearthed about Tobias's synchronized interference with key plays on the ice. "He knows more than he's letting on," Jonas replied, frustration creeping into his tone. "Heavily in debt, manipulated by the very systems we've stumbled upon." Her brow furrowed in concentration as she absorbed the documents. "They're trying to keep us isolated. I've felt the pressure, Jonas. My own department is a minefield." Their meeting was drawn to a close when Sarah's phone vibrated with a message, both a practical conclusion and an unnerving reminder of their vulnerable position in this clandestine game. They parted ways with a shared understanding. They were more than partners now. They were allies in an unwritten war. Back in the heart of the ice arena, the air was electric with the smell of excitement and anticipation of the evening's major game. Jonas maneuvered through the labyrinth of corridor network toward the locker rooms. The shadows seemed longer in this secluded area, each turn a subtle shift from frenetic energy to a foreboding malaise. When he reached the end of the hallway, he found himself face to face with Tobias Rein, whose nervous pacing halted upon Jonas's approach. The player was young, with a disheveled look that belied the human dynamo he became on ice. "Tobias," Jonas greeted. He noted the sweat lining Tobias's brow. It was a common sight, yet tonight it seemed more pronounced, like the onset of something sinister clawing at his conscience. "Jonas," Tobias replied tersely, glancing around the empty hallway. "I need to talk alone." Jonas nodded, leading Tobias to a small, unused office nearby. The walls felt closer here, the secrets they were about to exchange adding weight to the air. "Tell me what's going on," Jonas urged once the door was closed, his voice tight with urgency. "They've got me trapped," Tobias whispered, despair in his voice. "I'm supposed to throw the game. They know about the debts, my family, if I don't play by their rules." Jonas took a deep breath, his own fears secondarily amplified by Tobias's predicament. "You're an informant. Who are you working for?" There was a long pause, the silence filled with the echo of distant cheers as the crowd filled the stands above them. "People who don't wear team colors," Tobias finally replied, his voice barely more than a murmur. "They want the club in ruins. It's about control, about leverage." Jonas's heart sank. Tobias's victimization was more than a criminal offering, it was a twisted maneuver in a game of corporate chess, with Jonas and Sarah drawn into its shadowed play. Tobias tilted his head, a frail hope threading through his words. You have to help me. If the truth gets out, we both know what they'll do." "We will," Jonas assured him. "But we need something tangible, evidence that can't disappear overnight." Tobias nodded, some resolve finding purchase within the cracks of his desperation. "Meet me after the game. I'll have what you need." With Tobias's parting words, Jonas felt a new chill overtaking the usual one. Accountability was racing toward him at an unstoppable pace. He watched as Tobias disappeared back into the spirit of competition, leaving Jonas to contemplate the myriad threads they needed to unravel before it was too late. A thin layer of frost began to settle over the icy arena as the game night unfolded. Jonas, taking his place at his post, found himself scanning the crowd, searching for hidden signs of their unseen adversaries. Sarah was somewhere too, cloaked in her duty, yet fueled by a resolve shared between them. Up in the skybox, the club's executives watched the game, yet subtler machinations were at play. Jonas knew whom he had to contact next, a high-stakes gambler turned informant who had a knack for being at the right places at the right times. The game between the ZSC Lions and their rivals kicked off with a thunderous clamor, but Jonas's head remained submerged beneath the surface of turmoil. He could feel the presence of those who operated in shadows, and with each strike of the puck, felt the string pull tighter around them. As the game reached its closing moments, Jonas received a message on his phone, an untraceable number, a cryptic directive. His breath caught in his chest when he read it, a place, a time, an ultimatum overshadowed by the nature of their gathering storm. He knew the arena was closing in around them like walls in the mist, their time tethered preciously close to a breaking point. Jonas tucked away his phone as a new kind of energy crackled in the air, anticipation turning into a dreaded certainty. The final period was fast approaching, and so, too, was their reckoning. His gaze swung towards the ice where Sarah caught his eye from the opposite side, carrying the weight of shared purpose across the bustling distance. A referee's whistle pierced the air, a sharp halt to the near-symphonic chaos, and Jonas's pulse quickened. It wasn't merely a game anymore. It was an intricate layer of peril, cloaked in nightfall, where they would soon find out just how dangerous their knowledge had become. And as the swirl of spectators filed out of the ice arena, oblivious to the exception of entertainment met with mystery, Jonas and Sarah stood on the brink, each gamepiece set, unwilling players in a contest, with only the truth lost to the night's deadlier playbook. Chapter 4: Unmasked Intrigues. The cafe was bustling with locals clasping their mugs tightly, fogging every pane of the Overlook's extensive glass facade. The achingly beautiful vista of Lake Zürich, encased in winter's icy grip, loomed beyond as silver clouds layered the sky like quilted satin. The Overlook Café was rich with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the quieter notes of wood polish and the slight, crisp tang of the frozen landscape outside. "Jonas," Sarah stated flatly, leaning across the wooden table that separated them, "whatever you're about to say, you better be sure of." The slight quiver in Jonas's fingers did not escape her notice as his hand twitched towards the coffee cup before him. "I found this," he said, sliding a folder across to her, the papers inside whispering like secrets too long hidden. A quiet tension weighed the room at Jonas's apartment. A ripe blend of intrigue and anxiety clung to the air as Jonas and Sarah pored over the documents, names linked to sums that staggered the imagination. The faint ticking of the wall clock punctuated their silence, a metronome to their thoughts as Jonas explained the significance of each line item. Denslinger, Jonas mused, pointing to a name scrawled alongside figures that made no rational accounting sense. He disappeared only a week after these transactions began. If anyone knew what the management was so desperate to hide, it was him. Sarah jotted notes with a sharp efficiency, tearing through the mystery's surface with questions she'd weave into her report. "We've hit a dead end at every turn," she muttered, "but how these numbers mask the truth, this is our leverage." Suddenly, the distant jangle of keys in the hallway pulled them both toward the door. Jonas sprang up, a tension rippling through his body. He met Sarah's eyes briefly, a dense connection of determination and shared peril before he slipped out to peek through the peephole. The unanticipated visitor left a note, a folded piece of paper, as clandestine as it was ominous. Jonas's hands left streaks of moisture on the envelope as he unfolded it, revealing a single line: "Leave the past buried or be buried with it." A shared glance exchanged between them confirmed their unspoken resolve. Shadows of fear danced in the corners of the room, but Jonas felt something new stirring within, an unbreakable resolve, oxymoronic in its warmth amid the encroaching chill of dread. The echo of skates slicing ice resounded through the nearly empty arena, sharpening the contrast between the sport's purity and the corruption entwined within its underbelly. Jonas stood at the edge of the rink, the familiar scent of bracing coolness and polished wood mingling with the antiseptic tang of freshly washed jerseys. He surveyed Tobias, the rising star whose grace on the ice cloaked the dark entanglements beneath his skillful guise. Flashes of predator and prey within Tobias's eyes betrayed his unease, a flickering beacon to anyone watching as closely as Jonas did. "You're looking good, Tobias," Jonas called out, watching as the young man stopped short of him, sprays of ice feathering over Jonas's boots. "You keep this up and you'll be the next standout." Tobias's grin was tight, barely touching his eyes. "Thanks, but you know these aren't just rumors anymore," he replied, dodging the deeper question as he spun to resume practice. Jonas's silent communication spoke volumes. The debt-infested gamble teetered on the edge of discovery, an alluring yet terrifying precipice. Gripping the cold rail, Jonas watched the rehearsed maneuvers unravel beneath precision blades. He needed Sarah to see this, to witness how physical prowess, financial ambition, and criminal desperation knotted together within this cathedral of sport. But the clock was ticking, and if they wanted to pull the strings of this puppetry back, they needed a breakthrough, fast. They reconvened at the mountain chalet. Its sheer opulence reminded them why these crimes had festered undisturbed for so long. Wealth seduces more than just the guilty. Here, framed by extensive woodwork and snow-panned windows, Sarah had drawn on more than a deduction's whim. Her informant finally came forward with a voice heavy with omissions. The crackling hearth provided a deceptive warmth, one that darkened with every whispered admission from the insider. Jonas keenly felt the darkness draping over them like an insulated cloak. In legal terms, confession bore the weight of guilt like a stone craved for execution. "The betting," rasped the insider with eyes downcast and knees shaking, "it's not just the club. It connects to offshore accounts. Someone internal wanted it to expand beyond sport." The room's gravity shifted as Jonas absorbed the revelation. This new layer bore the heaviest implication yet: transnational crimes, investments in chaos where once there was only competition. This would explode into the kind of chaos His walls weren't meant to hide. "The championship match," Sarah echoed, her words like arrows loosed upon realization. "If Tobias throws it, let's use it. A sting operation." Her fierce gaze turned toward Jonas. "We don't need everything, just enough to rattle their foundations. Are you ready to risk it, Jonas?" The flames danced, shadows contorting in approval of their resolution. They nodded, a mutual agreement laced with the peril of what lay ahead. Together, they would unmask the sinister that lay beneath the ice, a pursuit as terrifying as it was inevitable. Yet the chills that streaked through Jonas's veins were not cold, but eager, for truth was their only weapon, and if wielded deftly, it just might be sharp enough to cut through the deceits cloaking Zürich's snowy streets. As they retreated to plan the forthcoming sting, words unspoken clung to the night's frost, the certainty that not all would emerge unscathed. In the back corridors of the club, where light was scarce and shadows danced with conspiratorial dexterity, Jonas met Sarah once more. The documents they had secured were just enough to stir the hornet's nest, names noted, dates aligned, suspicions woven into who would gain or suffer when secrets spilt. "We'll be wedged between the game's conclusion and whatever chaos ensues," Sarah instructed, "but timing is everything. We need both safety and spectacle. Can we count on everything you've documented?" Jonas nodded, eyes flashing with both fear and fervor. It's enough to demand change, but not so much they'd kill to protect it, just to threaten. A sound behind them stopped their breath as a figure's silhouette adjusted in the hallway's murky expanse. A faint glimmer Jonas recognized through the shroud of their unknown opponent. "Expect nothing but betrayal," the silhouette murmured, the sentiment brimming with sad certainty. Yet in chaos some truths thrive. The darkened visitor seemed strangely out of place, a ghost of forsaken ambitions or merely another enemy playing shadows upon the valiant. But Jonas and Sarah had no time to linger on possibility. The task before them was clear, with justice slipping down their spines like melted ice. Amid all the threats, conspiracy, and fear, their motivation remained unwavering. When the tale of crime's grotesque dance through the rink would unfold, they'd be there, documenting its decline. This silent promise, their cliff to climb, boggled so many heads with unfathomable stakes, but to those who understood, Avalon awaited. As Jonas turned to Sarah, their eyes met, a pact as firm as the lake's frozen depths, ready to shatter the stillness masking an undercurrent of corruption alive within the Zürich ice. They knew this was only the start. Soon, the world would see the orchestra of sporting virtue tuned to the melody of vice, and how courage, a weapon of the narrative's final stand, remained their lifeline. As the faint thrill of resolution skittered through their bones, Jonas and Sarah steeled themselves for the crescendo to come. Their truths, unrelenting but fragile, laid shadows to rest, until dawn and destiny met. Chapter 5: Threads of Deception. The wind howled, carrying with it the icy breath of a Swiss winter that nipped at the edges of the city. Sarah Meier stood at the edge of the rink in the heart of the ice arena, a state-of-the-art facility, a sleeping giant on the outskirts of Zürich near Lake Zürich. The arena was quiet in the early morning, its vast expanse echoing the stillness that hung heavy in the air. The steel and glass exterior glinted in the weak dawn light, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, the luxury skyboxes yawned empty above the rink, waiting to cradle yet another night of thunderous applause and the clash of blades against ice. But now, the only sound was the soft hum of cleaning machines polishing the mirror-like surface of the rink. Sarah adjusted her scarf against the chilling bite and peered through the gaps in the arena's doors, feeling like a detective in an old noir film, shrouded in secrecy with the intense figure of Jonas Keller by her side. The duo was a peculiar sight, she in her tailored wool coat, boots clicking against the cold concrete, and Jonas, a stolid presence in his understated winter jacket, with an air of quiet determination etched on his face. "I never imagined my passion for hockey would embroil me in something like this," Jonas confessed, his voice carrying the weight of fatigue and anger. His eyes, though tired, burned with a fierce resolve. It was the same determination that had led him this far, unraveling threads of deception woven tightly around the heart of the ZSC Lions. "You've started a trail, Jonas. Now we just need to follow it wherever it leads us," Sarah said, her tone both reassuring and focused. For weeks they'd been working together, a partnership formed out of necessity against the creeping shadow of corruption that loomed over the ice. Later that morning, the bustling heart of Zürich was beating steadily. Downtown Zürich in the business district was alive with the energy of early morning commuters, a river of suits and ties and tech-savvy professionals bustling into mirrored towers. It was here, amidst the elegance of financial institutions and high-end cafes, that Sarah sat waiting at a secluded table of a nondescript cafe. She immersed herself in the unfolding scene outside, where pedestrians moved in fluid, determined lines, and the occasional glint of a luxury vehicle added to the city's rhythm. Jonas arrived, pushing through the door with a jingle that cut through the hum of espresso machines and quiet conversations. His expression was as grim as ever, but his sharp eyes hinted at something more, a revelation perhaps. She motioned him over, and as he slid into the chair across from her, the warmth of the cafe enveloped them both. "Any progress?" she asked, leaning in conspiratorially. His hands rested on a small folder he'd brought, fingers drumming a silent rhythm. "More like a puzzle, with pieces still missing. The financials you acquired." He pushed a document towards her, its pages bristling with notes and highlighter marks. "They hint at a pattern in the missing funds, but every turn leads to more questions. We've identified key sponsors involved, but the real players are still in the shadows." Sarah studied the document, her brow furrowed with concentration. "And my superiors, they're stonewalling, delaying every request, typical when the stakes are high." She let out a heavy sigh. "But I've had whispers from some within the department about resistance against the corruption at the club. We might have allies." "Any names?" Jonas's question was hopeful yet cautious. She shook her head. "Nothing concrete, just a sentiment, but it's a start. We need more, Jonas, evidence that's indisputable." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden intrusion of a tall figure at their table, a man in an overcoat that matched the wintry gloom outside, the familiar face of Tobias Rein. His unexpected arrival was both jarring and significant, a wrinkle in their clandestine meeting that piqued their interest. He slid into the seat beside Jonas, his eyes flitting nervously around the room, as if seeking unseen enemies in every corner. "I didn't realize we had company," Jonas said, his tone measured but lacking warmth. Tobias's gaze settled on Sarah, his expression earnest though harried. "I didn't want to approach you like this," he began, "but it's urgent. I've got something you both need to hear." Jonas raised a questioning eyebrow, and Sarah maintained her neutrality, aware that Tobias's apparent allegiance was still as slippery as ice beneath a skater's blade. "What is it, Tobias?" Sarah inquired, leaning forward into the space between them. Tobias exhaled deeply, visibly struggling with his confession. "The debts. They aren't just personal, they're leverage. I was coerced, pressured into becoming an informant." Words came out in a rush, heavy with guilt and relayed in a voice dipped in desperation. Sarah's gaze sharpened, but before she could speak, Tobias continued. "The betting rings woven deep into the fabric of the club's operations. And there's a game coming up that they can't afford to lose." Jonas leaned back, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You're saying the match is fixed?" Tobias nodded, the weight of his admission noticeably easing his tension. "It goes higher than the sponsors, much higher." There was a beat of silence, Sarah and Jonas exchanging a look laden with the promise of newfound momentum amidst the den of lies they'd been attempting to navigate. "Prove it," Sarah said, her voice cool and calculated, yet understanding. "Help us expose this before it's too late." Tobias's hesitance was palpable, but only for a moment. "I'll help," he said. "I have enough to at least start tracing the real players, but I'll need protection, once they know I've turned." The implication hung between them like a specter, as the noise of the cafe resumed its symphony around their hushed conversation. Outside, the rhythm of Zürich continued unabated, unaware of the tempest of treachery and betrayal brewing beneath its facade. The dusk settled over Zürich with a creeping chill as Jonas and Sarah made their way to the Overlook Cafe. Nestled on a sweeping hill, the cafe overlooked the frozen splendor of Lake Zürich, now shrouded in the dim mystique of encroaching night. The view was breathtaking, a tranquil respite that stood in stark contrast to the discord that central Zürich harbored. As they entered the warmly lit space, the aroma of brewed coffee mingled with the subtle undertone of cinnamon, greeting them like a promise of warmth and comfort. They chose a table by the wide windows, the view framed like a painting of frozen serenity. Yet within this calm lay their chosen battlefield. "You know," Jonas said over his cup, the steam curling upwards, "I sometimes wonder if any of this is worth it." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding written in the lines that knotted her brow. "It is, if we can save even a shred of integrity. Corruption is like ice, dangerous, slippery, but it's not indestructible." He smiled grimly at the metaphor. "I never imagined my penchant for numbers would lead to fighting an entire network of criminal enterprise." Her eyes softened. "We often end up where we least expect to make the most difference, Jonas." A thoughtful silence passed between them as they watched the icy dusk deepen outside like an ink spill across the horizon. Their moment of companionship was brutally interrupted by the abrupt vibration of Jonas's phone against the table, a call from an unlisted number. The intrusion stirred an unsteady tension between them, a reminder of the looming danger. "Who?" Sarah began, but Jonas raised a hand, accepting the call with a swipe. His eyes widened as he listened to the voice on the other end, words that neither would soon forget, words that plunged the temperature of the cafe back to the biting chill of the winter night outside. "They know about Tobias. They're coming for him." His voice was a whisper, yet it carried the heavy weight of looming threat. Sarah's heart raced, her mind calculating their next steps even as she felt the chill of danger close around them. But before she could utter another word, Jonas cut the call, pulling their scattered resolve into a steely determination. "We need to find him now." As they surged from their seats, the tranquil cafe with its frozen views fell away to urgency, an urgency that promised a perilous chase under Zürich's velvet night sky, where unseen foes existed in every shadow and threatened every step, an icy game of life and death. And so, amidst the adventurous plumes of their breath in the cold night air, Sarah and Jonas plunged back into the fray, determined now more than ever to unravel the tangled web of deceit laced tightly against the throbbing heart of the ice hockey world. Chapter 6: Dark Shadows over the Rink. The crisp winter air surrounded the ice arena on Zürich's outskirts like a shivering cloak, the cold forming delicate crystals along its steel and glass structure. Inside, the early morning hush was broken only by the hum of machinery and the distant echo of skates against the ice. This was the hidden world where Jonas Keller found solace, a realm away from the chaos bubbling beneath the surface of the ice hockey club. Jonas walked around the nearly empty arena, his footsteps echoing against the polished concrete floors. The seats, empty now, would soon be filled with cheering fans oblivious to the turmoil unfolding behind the scenes. The financial office lay beneath the rink, a sterile space of white walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, the heart of what Jonas now knew to be a complex web of deceit. In the cramped office, Jonas sorted through another batch of financial reports, his fingers tracing down printed spreadsheets as if they were pages of a suspense novel. Every misplaced fraction, every anomalous transaction whispered possibilities of betrayal. His eyes flicked to the corkboard against the wall, cluttered with notes and printouts, a tangible map of his investigation. As he sat immersed in his work, the atmosphere tensed, like the pause before a storm. Jonas's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He saw Sarah's name flash across the screen. "Jonas, are you alone?" Sarah Meier's voice was a mix of urgency and whispered caution. Her tone, though familiar and reassuring, was tinged with the underlying stress of untold pressures. "Yes, just going through more reports. This place feels more like a vault of secrets each day," Jonas replied, keeping his voice low. "I'm on my way. There's something you need to see," Sarah replied, her words clipped with urgency. Later, under the dim lighting of Jonas's apartment, Sarah sat across from him at the small, well-worn kitchen table. The room was filled with the scent of strong coffee, and outside the city was a hushed backdrop, the night impenetrable and still. Sarah placed a small, black USB drive on the table between them. "I managed to recover this from the department's internal network before it was wiped clean. It contains emails and documents linking the club's management to offshore accounts." Jonas picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his fingers. "If what you found is solid, then this could be the leverage we need to expose everything." A heavy silence stretched between them as they both grappled with the risks. The stakes had never felt so high, the consequences so perilous. Yet, something akin to resolve simmered in the air, pushing away the tendrils of fear. "How much danger are we in truly?" Jonas asked, leaning back, his eyes meeting Sarah's with mounting concern. "Every step we take makes this more dangerous than the last. But," Sarah paused, her lip quivering with resolve, "we're in too deep to turn back now." Suddenly, there was a crash against the window, a flurry of movement in the shadows outside. Both of them jumped up, their hearts pounding in sync with the echoing noise. The brief moment of peace shattered by the reminder of lurking threats. "Stay back," whispered Sarah, gesturing towards the door. She moved quietly towards the window, peering out into the night where only darkness stared back. "Probably just the wind," she said, though her voice carried more anxiety than reassurance. It was a reminder that their every move was under surveillance, each shadow a potential foe. The Overlook Cafe was a picture of tranquility the following morning, nestled on a hill with panoramic views over Lake Zürich. Sarah sat at a corner table, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, as she waited for Jonas. The cafe buzzed with the gentle murmur of conversation, its sleepy atmosphere a comforting facade amidst the underlying currents of fear and suspicion. Jonas arrived, wrapped in a heavy coat that he peeled off as he sat down. He draped it over the chair beside him and greeted Sarah with a nod. "Any news since last night?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room for any suspicious faces. "Only whispers," Sarah replied. Her own gaze surveyed the patrons, aware of every glance in their direction. "More files have started disappearing from the department's servers. They know we're closing in." "Do you think they'll come after us directly?" Sarah shook her head slightly. "They still need the shadows to work in their favor. Visibility blinds their power, but we can't be reckless. Now more than ever, we need to be careful." A waitress brought their breakfast, her warm smile a stark contrast to their somber expressions. As the plates were placed before them, the normalcy of the act provided a temporary reprieve from their constant vigilance. "Jonas, what's our next step?" Sarah's question cut through the buttery aroma of croissants, bringing them back to the gravity of their mission. He paused, carefully considering their delicate position. "First, we need to ensure these findings reach the right people without getting intercepted. If we can negotiate with the powers that may help protect us, we could turn the tides." Jonas took a sip of his coffee, its bitterness grounding him. The path ahead was treacherous, a narrow line through which they must tread carefully, balancing their quest for justice against their fight for survival. As the day dragged on into evening, Jonas and Sarah found themselves back at the ice arena. The place was alive now with the roars of fans, the cacophony of excitement reverberating through the walls. The energy vibrated through the corridors as players rushed past, focused on the night's game. Jonas saw Tobias Rein, the rising star with persistent debts, speaking with a group of men in tailored suits. There was something unsettling about their presence, a reminder of the underlying corruption they all battled against. Jonas caught Tobias's eye for a moment before the young player looked away, seemingly burdened by unseen chains. "What do we do about him?" Jonas asked as Sarah joined him, her gaze following his towards Tobias. "Tobias is playing a dangerous game," Sarah said. "If we can convince him to turn whistleblower, it might dismantle their entire operation." But, she paused, "he's caught between survival and his own downfall. We need to approach this delicately." The game began, the stadium erupting into cheers. But beneath this normal facade lay dark shadows, waiting for the wrong move that could change everything. As Jonas and Sarah navigated the crowds, the illumination of the arena felt like a spotlight on their every interaction, every decision. The night stretched into a tense ballet of anticipation, the thrill of the game overshadowed by their urgent task. Jonas scanned the faces in the crowd, the excitement masking potential threats. Deep within the layers of noise and celebration lurked an unsettling undercurrent, a prelude to the confrontation brewing just beneath the surface. As the final whistle signaled the game's end, Jonas and Sarah left the arena behind. But as they merged into the night, their determined silhouettes against Zürich's twinkling skyline, they both felt the weight of what lay ahead. A battle they would need to fight, not only for themselves, but for the truth they sought to unearth. And in those moments of quiet contemplation before the storm, they could almost hear the whispers of what was to come, a clash not just of teams, but of justice versus deception. To be continued. Chapter 7: Shadows in the Snow. The echoes of skates scraping against ice reverberated through the grand expanse of the ice arena's basement, as Jonas Keller navigated the labyrinthine corridors. The air was sharp with the scent of resin and metal, while the muted hum of overhead lighting offered an illusion of warmth amidst the concrete coldness. He halted at the locker room door, aware that beyond it lay secrets and suspicions bundled together like players on a bench, waiting for the game to commence. Inside, voices ebbed and flowed, tension palpable among the players. Today wasn't just another practice session. It felt like the calm before the storm, a mounting pressure that mirrored the Swiss peaks visible from the arena's high windows. Jonas took a breath and entered, his purpose set. As Sarah Meier made her way through the city center, every turn seemed fraught with a sense of unseen eyes watching from mirrored high-rises. Central Zürich buzzed around her with an air of efficiency and opulence, starkly contrasting the clandestine operations she was trying to uncover. Her senses honed over the years in the police force kept her vigilant. She felt the weight of the forthcoming meeting with Jonas weigh on her more with each step. At the Overlook Café, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the chill from Lake Zürich below, offering a deceptive sense of security. Jonas was already seated by the window, looking like he hadn't rested in days, finger combing through notes laid out in front of him. Sarah settled across from him, offering a nod instead of words. Their understanding had transcended verbal greetings at this point. "Sarah, they're closing in. Every move I make seems shadowed by someone else's agenda," Jonas began, tone edged with a latent urgency. "The transactions, they're more intricate than we thought. Offshore banks, layered accounts, even ties to betting syndicates that cross borders." His hands clenched in an effort to rein in frustration. "And Tobias Rein, the kid's debt is tied tight to this mess. If he goes under, we lose a massive part of this puzzle." Sarah's gaze narrowed, calculating and cautious. "And what about your past, Jonas? You mentioned you had connections that might come back to haunt you. Should I be worried?" He tilted his head back against the chair, letting out a low, humorless chuckle. "Probably, but my family's shadows are what this is about. It's about righting this mess before it's all too late." "What do you propose we do?" Sarah pressed, her professional mask unwavering even as her mind stumbled at the looming threats they faced. "We need someone on the inside," Jonas said, avoiding her eyes. "And I think we both know who that has to be." The training facility's fluorescent glow bathed the remaining players in shades of fatigue as Jonas cornered Tobias in a secluded alcove. The air was punctuated by the muted thuds of sticks against pucks, a reassurance of the world's rhythm outside their personal storm. Tobias's features were drawn, shadowed with regret and fear, as Jonas confronted him. "They've got you in their pocket, kid, but it doesn't have to end that way," Jonas started, planting himself firmly between Tobias and escape. Tobias's eyes danced around, seeking exits before landing on Jonas with submission. "I didn't have a choice. The debts, they piled up fast, and then there were threats. You don't understand." "No, I do, but you have a choice now," Jonas interrupted, softening his tone. "Help us get to the bottom of this, prove what they're doing. We can protect you, get you clear." For a moment the younger man seemed unchanged, trapped in an internal battle, until a furtive nod broke the silence. "I'm in," Tobias breathed, a fresh resolve lacing his demeanor. Jonas clapped a reassuring hand on Tobias's shoulder, his own wearied by the dawning complexity of the task ahead. "Good. Now we'll find a way through this mess." Dusk fell heavily over the mountain chalet, swathing its luxury in darkness and whispers of deceit. The retreat, now nearing emptiness, was rife with rumors, management dancing around each other with the elegance of a chess game, and secrets etching deeper lines in their faces. At the heart of it, two factions of the ice hockey club's board convened, tension electrifying the air. Jonas listened from where he stood at a shaded corner of the paneled room, and his mind catalogued the unfolding power plays. "Cleaning house means cutting our business, Gerhardt," one voice argued with the trembling fervor of righteousness betrayed. "We won't survive another season like this." "We keep what we need secret, but we don't uproot the bloody tree," Gerhardt, a towering man with a voice more accustomed to making demands, countered. "Besides, the boy, Rein, can't counter us now." The discussion spun on, but Jonas withdrew, his mind a whirlpool of half-heard declarations and veiled threats. He needed to regroup, reassemble the fragment of understanding he held, and converge it into a tangible assault. The thrill of the chase beckoned Jonas even as his gut protested, foretelling of an ominous end he couldn't yet glimpse. The scene darkened behind him while, above the peaks, a lone eagle's cry was devoured by the night, a prelude to the storm looming in all their horizons. Jonas and Sarah reconvened at her office, a sanctuary now riddled with the paranoia that stalked them. Every creak of the building brought a new wave of unease. They pored over the gathered evidence, stolen funds, hidden partnerships and strings leading back to figures of supposed prestige within the Zürich finance district. "This championship, Sarah, it's their last stand," Jonas stated, thrusting documents towards her. "The stakes are higher than just who claims the cup, and Tobias, he's crucial to turning the tide." "We'll need airtight evidence to bring in the right support," Sarah mused, eyes scanning through potential allies. "Someone who can't be bought or bullied." She turned to Jonas, a plan forming that would test every boundary she had sworn to uphold. "I'll need you to go deeper, find the evidence within the club, and watch your back. Every move has risks." Jonas nodded, the enormity of the task resting heavily on his shoulders. But even as he worried, determination eclipsed his fear. "Count on it. I won't let them win without a fight." As they moved to part, the dim light casting long shadows across the floor, Jonas paused at the threshold. "And Sarah, if things go wrong?" "They won't," she cut in, the steel in her voice reassuring yet full of unsaid fears. "We'll find a way to make this right." A shared, uneasy laughter broke the tension as Jonas left, each aware that their next steps blurred the line between justice and imperilment. Outside, the winds rose, carrying old secrets and new betrayals in their grasp, whispers of the coming reckoning. The night was quiet as Jonas reached his apartment, the sounds of the city muted by icy winds sweeping through Zürich's streets. Yet as he closed the door behind him, his security felt fragile, the walls thinner, as if the mysteries grappled within could breach his asylum. Flicking on a small lamp, he glanced at the corkboard, an ongoing testament to pursued truths suspended in shadows. His phone buzzed, shattering the silence, and he answered with a mix of apprehension and hope. "Jonas," Tobias's voice was fraught with urgency. "It's worse than we thought. Meet me at the arena tomorrow night. We need to talk before it all goes down. I'll have proof this time." Jonas agreed, a chill settling deep in his bones. As the call ended, he stood alone, surrounded by the quiet resonance of consequence. The evidences they'd gathered, alliances forged in secrecy, all connected to the razor-thin edge upon which they now balanced. Cliffhangers lay in wait, imbued with the threat of discovery and betrayal. Jonas felt their presence heralded by the creak of floorboards, the whisper of curtains against the chill, a reminder of the dangers lingering just beyond the periphery of the night. A storm brewed, coiling in the horizon as futures hung precariously over the unfolding twilight, shadows slowly merging with the setting sun. Whatever awaited in the heart of the arena, it would arrive rested on the cusp of discovery and devastation. Jonas Keller knew one thing with certainty, as glaringly clear as the winter stars: the game was far from over. Chapter 8: The Game Behind the Game. The crisp winter evening draped Zürich in a gauzy veil of frost, the air so cold it bit the skin. The ice arena loomed against the slate sky, its steel and glass exterior reflecting the stark magnificence of Lake Zürich in the distance. Inside, the ambience was electric, filled with the anticipatory hum of spectators arriving for a much-anticipated match. The occasional sound of skates slicing through ice from the ongoing warm-ups hinted at the tense competition, unfolding beneath layers of public spectacle. Seated in a secluded corner of the Overlook Café, Jonas Keller sipped his steaming coffee thoughtfully. The café was a sanctuary, its wooden interior warmed by a crackling fireplace, a stark contrast to the tumultuous world outside. Through the wide windows, the frozen expanse of Lake Zürich glimmered under the dull light of the setting sun, a serene sight belied by the storm brewing in Jonas's mind. Sarah Meier slipped into the seat across from him, her expression weary but resolute. "Any new thoughts, Jonas?" she asked, her tone carrying the weight of unyielding determination that had come to define her since they began their fraught journey together. Jonas nodded, his eyes flickering with a mix of anxiety and resolve. "I found something in the accounts, Sarah. Transaction entries that didn't make sense, ledgers that seemed doctored. It's deeper than we thought." She leaned forward, her focus intensifying. "Deeper how?" "There's mention of consulting fees," Jonas continued, lowering his voice. "Ludicrous amounts paid to firms that don't exist, or if they do, they're shelled companies. These things are always tied to the same names over and over, with ties reaching far beyond this city." "The betting ring," Sarah murmured, understanding dawning on her features. "And those offshore accounts." "Exactly," Jonas replied, leaning back. He rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had been building over weeks of sleepless nights. "These fake consultations correlate with significant losses during games. It's orchestrated, Sarah." Sarah's eyes darkened, realizing the magnitude of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about a few corrupt managers lining their pockets. It was a calculated operation that threatened the sport's integrity. As the doors swung open to admit a fresh gust of winter air, a shadowy figure crept in unnoticed, watching Jonas and Sarah from a distance. The games were not just on ice. They cascaded into every dark alley and corporate office surrounding Zürich's core. Tobias Rein sat in the locker room, the chill seeping through his gear, feeling more like a prisoner than the rising star everyone else believed him to be. He stared at the beaming Lions logo on his jersey, feeling the weight of a different kind of game steadily pressing upon his shoulders. The management's expectations drummed in his mind against the roar of the crowd outside. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his water bottle, a signal of the growing fear of failure, or worse, discovery. He had been meeting their demands for intel, feeding them with details about plays late at night when shadows obliterated any sense of right, wrong, or remorse. The locker room door creaked, and Tobias's teammate Marcus bounded in, his cheeks flushed with enthusiasm. "We've got this one tonight, Toby," he said, clapping him on the back. "This game is ours." Tobias forced a smile, nodding as if he could mask the turmoil within. "Yeah, can't wait." But as Marcus moved away, Tobias's expression faltered, knowing well that this evening brought more than a match. He'd been told to ensure a certain play to turnover, a manipulation of sports and stakes that left a bitter taste in his mouth. The shadow of those terrifying debts loomed over him, threatening to consume all his dreams. He stood, shaking off the trepidation, and moved toward the ice where the harshly lit world awaited him, a world where he had become a pawn in someone else's dangerous game. The mountain chalet stood shrouded by the veil of swirling snow, its opulent rooms palatial yet remote. It was a perfectly insidious hideaway for secret meetings that couldn't be held within the city. Fringed with magnificent vistas of the Swiss Alps, it was as exclusive as it was elusive. Behind the heavy velvet curtains, figures huddled around the grand wooden table, their voices a mixture of clipped German and Swiss accents, droning onward with the deliberate cadence of clandestine Confederates. It was here that the real stratagems of the crime unfolded, far from the ice, but dictating every puck's movement, every blown whistle. The club's higher-ups bickered amongst themselves, some twitching with the restless desire to wash their hands of this fraudulent web, others eager to secure the bountiful, illicit profits that came with each contrived match outcome. "Our issue is not with the operation," one of the senior partners spoke. His voice dripping with condescension. "It's risk management." "It's all coming apart," another countered fiercely. "Jonas Keller and that inspector, they're digging where they shouldn't." A thin smile ghosted over the lips of a shadowy figure seated at the head of the table, known only by reputation, yet woven deep into the machinations at play. "Leave Keller and the inspector to me. Ensuring their silence is a matter of time." Assents murmured their way around the chamber, the oblivious crescendo of agreement as sinister as the choir outside the chalet, the howling wind announcing the night. As evening deepened, the clandestine assembly dispersed, vanishing into the wilderness back toward the city's underbelly. Left behind were decisions carved in the frost that were soon to unravel upon the ice rink in a spectacle neither Jonas nor Sarah was prepared to face. Back at the ice arena, the match was well underway, the players a whirlwind of color and strength amidst the endless white. Jonas found himself amongst the throng of spectators, his mind suppressing the screaming vowels of underlying chaos with practiced effort. He watched Tobias on the ice, noting the hesitations, perceiving the weight of unspoken threats tied to his every calculated move. Beside him, Sarah was attuned to the nuances of behavior, from the officials' glances to the fervid cheers that seemed too orchestrated. Everything painted a picture larger than the game played, or staged, on the ice. Steadily, the match veered towards its climax, every heartbeat synchronized with the transition of the puck. Jonas's focus sharpened, every nerve taut with anticipation, a sea of worry and hope clashing like combatants within him. Finally, in a crucial moment, Tobias faltered, a misstep significant enough to alter the course of the match. His actions felt choreographed to a rhythm dictated by his unseen puppeteers. The crowd erupted into chaos, unaware of the seam pulling tighter until threatened with the unraveling. Jonas leaned in, whispered urgently to Sarah, "That's it, the play, we need to move now." Sarah nodded, slipping through the shadows of the stadium corridors, where strategy and chance found their duel, as the ice crackled and the stakes towered higher, spiraling into an intricate finale where justice and corruption would collide. As they maneuvered through the labyrinthine paths behind the scenes, the chill of anticipation cut deeper, Jonas's heart hammering with each syllable of an unvoiced promise. Uncover the truth before it is too late. And then the stadium lights flickered, an unexpected signal woven into the tapestry of the evening's events. Jonas's phone buzzed in his pocket. The message left his skin cold as the ice outside. The final battle awaited, their lives tethered to the web they dared to unravel. Chapter 9: Shadows of Deception. The icy winds howled across the Zürich outskirts, rattling the steel and glass frame of the grand ice arena. The night was thick with anticipation, the air razor-sharp with the tension of waiting crowds huddled in layers against the winter's bite. It was the eve of the most crucial match of the season, and as the moonlight cast pallid streaks over the frozen lake, Jonas Keller drove his car into the arena's staff parking lot with an unsettling weight settled in his chest. The engine ceased its growl, leaving only the sound of Jonas's rapid heartbeat echoing in the silence of the deserted lot. Inside the arena, he found Detective Inspector Sarah Meier, a beacon of determined calm amidst the storm of chaos that brewed within both the building and their investigation. Her eyes, sharp as ever, met his from across the lobby, and she beckoned him with a tilt of her chin. They moved towards the back offices, where the real game was silently being played. The fluorescent lights in the office hallway flickered as they walked, casting erratic patterns on the polished floor that mirrored the unstable ground upon which they now treaded. Quietly, they entered a small conference room, the blinds drawn tight and the table cluttered with case files and scattered notes. It was a haven of organized chaos. Each paper represented a threat or a potential breakthrough. "Jonas," Sarah began, her voice low, almost a whisper against the purring heater. "Have you found anything new?" Jonas hesitated, then nodded, unfolding a freshly printed page of data. "I accessed the club's payment systems again. There's more money being funneled into an offshore account. The names attached, several are aliases, but one is linked to a high-profile board member." Her fingers tapped a relentless beat against the tabletop. Names. He hesitated again, the gravity of their conversation a tangible weight. "Richter, he's deeper in it than we thought, and there's more." Jonas swallowed, the room's warmth suddenly stifling. "I found an encrypted file. It's heavily protected, and it's tied to more of Tobias Rein's communications." Sarah straightened, the tension in her shoulders easing into a hard, determined line. "We need that file, Jonas." "I know," he replied, settling into a chair opposite her. "I'll get it, but we need to be careful. Every move we make seems 3 steps behind." Their eyes locked in mutual understanding, a silent pact to unravel the corruption tethering them to this shadowy world of deceit and danger. But as steadfast as they were, the realm of meddling politics and potent vendettas from above threatened to unravel everything with their every breath. The following day dawned with a thick fog hanging over the city, casting an eerie veil that blurred the lines between real and unreal, truth and deception. Jonas stood outside the ice arena, his eyes drifting over the morning practice of the ZSC Lions. The air was pierced periodically by the clamor of skates slicing the ice and the echo of a puck against the boards. His focus, however, was not on the game, but on the figure observing from the stands, Tobias Rein. There was something off about his demeanor, a certain twitch of nervousness that betrayed a deeper involvement than Jonas had previously realized. With a resolute stride, Jonas approached the young player. "Morning, Tobias. You ready for tonight?" Tobias's eyes shot up, panic flashing briefly before composure slipped back into place like a well-worn mask. "Jonas, yeah, ready as I'll ever be. Why?" Jonas opted for casual nonchalance, leaning against the rail. "Just checking in. You seem a bit on edge. Everything okay?" For a moment, silence reigned as Tobias considered his response, the hesitance telling volumes. "Just a lot on my mind. The championship and all." Understandable, Jonas probed lightly. High-stakes game. Just remember, as much as it's about the score on the board, it's about what's going on behind it too. Tobias blinked, the significance of those words settling like still waters disturbed by a pebble. Is there something you know that I should? Jonas narrowed his gaze, carefully threading concern with urgency. You tell me, Tobias. I get the feeling there's more at play than just hockey. If there's something wrong, if you're in too deep with debts or anything else, maybe I can help. The facade crumbled, Tobias's defenses collapsing under the weight of secrets long held. I don't know what to do, Jonas, he admitted, voice cracking under the strain. They have me by the throat. If I don't follow through, I'm done for. Who? You know who. It was enough to confirm Jonas's suspicions, that Tobias was another pawn in a game far larger and more dangerous than the young player had ever anticipated. But there was no time to unravel the web here. The clock ticked towards the evening game, and the stakes could not be higher. Evening fell, bringing with tea and atmosphere elevated to fever pitch as the ice arena filled to capacity with a roar of expectation. Every seat was occupied, every voice a part in the chorus of fandom, while above, the luxury skyboxes hosted the elite whose interests in the outcome went far beyond mere sporting pride. Hidden in the shadows of the crowd, Sarah maneuvered through spectators towards her destination, a narrow observation deck where her view included the VIP stands. Her goal was clear: to pinpoint the movements of those pulling the strings, those whose hidden dealings threatened the very fabric of integrity within the club. Below, Jonas found his way to the locker rooms, weaving past players and staff alike. His mind spun with possibilities and risks, each thought a thread tugging at the tapestry of machinations he barely understood. But one thought resounded above the cacophony. Tobias's cry for help was a clarion call to act. In the dimly lit equipment room, the sound of his cell phone vibrated through the echoing corridors. It was Sarah. Jonas, her voice crackled across the line, found something. Richter's not alone up there. He's meeting with someone. I think it's our missing link. Who? One of the international referees. They're making their move. Tonight's the night. We need to stop this. Jonas's heart thundered in his chest, adrenaline surging. The final pieces slotted into place, illuminating a picture much graver than anticipated. He pocketed his phone, determination forged into the steel of resolve. But as Jonas stepped back into the hallway, the illuminating integrity of their cause struck against a violent shadow. A figure emerged from the depths of the locker room, one Jonas vaguely recognized by stature, a shadowed ally turned adversary. There was no time to think before a meaty fist collided with his jaw, sending Jonas sprawling into the wall, dazed but instinctively aware of the impending danger. Darkness edged his vision, the hallway twisting into unfamiliar shapes, but deeper instincts kept him on his feet. It was no coincidence, the timing of this attack, the edge of the knife's blade against his throat whispering threats unspoken. Before vision collapsed entirely, Sarah's distant voice over the phone was the sole tether anchoring him to consciousness. We won't let them win, Jonas whispered fiercely into the encroaching night, clinging to the last vestiges of defiance as everything blurred into the distance. The darkness swallowed him whole. The game roared on above, the crowd unaware of the skullduggery unfolding beneath their feet. On the ice, the players skated with fervor uninhibited by the drama twisting through the arena's veins, their minds focused solely on victory. Above, Sarah watched through the glass confines of the VIP box, eyes honed to any anomaly in Richter's interactions. Every sweep was calculated, every pause noted, building with tension none below could fathom. I'm in position, she murmured into the miniature mic clipped inside her coat, her other hand at her lips, brushing against the apprehension that tightened her every muscle. All clear, a voice crackled back through her earpiece. Just give the word, Meier. Then a movement, A subtle exchange between Richter and the international referee, the flash of a cell phone's lens capturing moments others might dismiss but Sarah caught with blistering focus. This was it, the proof they needed, the linchpin in their case to unravel the corruption secreting itself within the club's heart. But as her phone chimed once more, her fingers hovered nervously over it. The name flashed unread, Jonas. A chill spiked through her, recognizing the dangerous gravity absent from his voice earlier. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she felt its weight settling in the pit of her stomach. "Stay with me, Keller," she whispered more to herself than to the empty air. The arena lights seemed to flicker in resonance with the rapid beating of Jonas's heart as he awoke to the dull ache spreading through his limbs. The dingy room where he'd been left was chilled, a lifeless cube where only the sound of his own labored breathing echoed. He assessed his situation quickly, defiance boiling in his veins despite the thick fog clouding his mind. Tied to an old metal chair, hands bound securely behind him, the only option was to wait and hope. Scuffles and whispers outside indicated proximity to danger nestled within the heart of what he'd uncovered. Footsteps neared and fingers already slicking with sweat curled into fists, crafted from both anger and adrenaline. If anything were to happen, it must happen swiftly. He forced a calm over himself, relying on the conviction that Sarah wouldn't abandon him. The door swung open, revealing his assailant, whose face morphed with an unsettling glee at Jonas's state. The assailant loomed closer, a monologue ready upon his lips. "No more nosing around, Keller. This game ends now." But little did they know the game was only ever beginning. For shadows thrived in deception, but light, once wielded, could turn even the trickiest foe to ashes. Jonas knew the stakes, understood the peril, and as the arena's low rumble crescendoed into a roar from the final match above, he braced himself for the revelation that would shake both ice and men to their cores. Would justice triumph, or would darkness metastasize, consuming everything in its grasp? The cliffhanger's answer shrouded in the gathering shadows. Chapter 10: The Deepening Shadows. The pale glow of morning light seeped through the frosted glass windows of the ice arena, casting elongated shadows across the pristine rink. The cold air inside seemed to bite harder this morning, perhaps reflecting the tension mounting both within the ice hockey club and amidst those seeking to unveil its secrets. Jonas Keller, bundled in a navy peacoat, leaned against the arena's steel barrier, eyes fixed on the sparkling, untouched ice. It was a serene view, deceptively peaceful, masking the chaos beneath its surface. Jonas took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day's tasks. His thoughts drifted to Sarah Meier, hoping she was making headway from her front. In the dimly lit corner of the overlooked cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweetness of pastries, casting a comforting cloak around its patrons. The cafe served as a temporary sanctuary for Sarah Meier, who was seated at a table overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Zürich. Her military-style coat hung over the back of her chair as she thumbed through pages of hastily scribbled notes. A mug of steaming coffee lay untouched beside her while she reviewed the scant bits of evidence remaining from what should have been a promising case. Witnesses had grown tight-lipped, and the most crucial documents had vanished. She couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of bureaucracy closing in, a systematic handcuffing her every move. The clinking of a porcelain mug drew her attention as Jonas slipped into the seat opposite her. His brow was furrowed with concern, deepening the worry lines etched into his tanned face. "Any progress?" Sarah asked, pushing the fresh stack of papers toward him. Jonas shook his head. "Not much. I did, however, manage to retrieve some encrypted ledgers," he replied in a hushed tone. His eyes darted around, ever wary of unwanted ears. "But I can't crack the cipher." "And Tobias?" Sarah leaned in, her voice a mere whisper. "He hasn't shown up for practice in days. Word is he's feeling the squeeze from his creditors," Jonas replied, his voice tinged with frustration. Sarah sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. We can't afford to lose sight of any piece, not now. Tobias's connections to the betting ring might be the tipping point we need. Their conversation faltered as a new melody of ringing phones resounded throughout the cafe. Sarah exchanged a knowing glance with Jonas, a tacit understanding of the power she was up against, before she began gathering her belongings. We should reconvene at the mountain chalet tomorrow, Jonas suggested. There's talk of a major meeting, and it might be our chance to corner those pulling the strings. Sarah nodded in agreement. I'll make sure we have enough cover. They parted ways with a determination renewed, yet an uneasy tension lingered in their wake like an acrid smoke, an omen of struggles yet to come. That evening, the elegant, mirrored buildings of downtown Zürich's business district shimmered against the twilight sky, like sentinels guarding the enigmatic motives concealed within. Jonas weaved through the ebb and flow of savvy professionals, his pace unyielding as he clutched a slim leather dossier under his arm. His destination was a modest office nestled between towering skyscrapers, where he was to meet an insider, a reluctant but vital ally within the club's management hierarchy. As Jonas entered the minimalist lobby, the sterile air was thick with cynicism, a reality he had come to know all too well. The insider, a woman in her 30s named Alyssa Vogel, met him in a conference room lined with floor-length windows, providing an expansive view of the bustling city streets below. "So you finally found the time," Jonas remarked pointedly as he took a seat. Alyssa straightened her blazer, her expression tense. "I can't stay long. They're already suspicious of me." "Then let's not waste any time. What can you tell me about the meeting at the chalet?" Jonas asked, cutting straight to the chase. Alyssa hesitated, glancing around as though the walls themselves had ears. "They've been bringing in outside consultants, people involved in off-the-books financial arrangements." "Who specifically?" Jonas pressed. "I couldn't get names, but I overheard mention of a financial cleanup operation. They're planning a major money laundering scheme through the club," she whispered urgently. Jonas felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The implications were severe, threatening not just the club's future but also his safety. It astounded him how deep the rot had spread. "Thank you, Alyssa. This information is invaluable," he said sincerely. "We'll be in touch soon. Be careful." As they parted, Jonas's mind raced with possibilities. He knew they were treading on shaky ground, but retreat was not an option. Not now, not when the stakes were higher than ever. The mountain chalet loomed under a brooding sky, its snow covered roof and warm, inviting glow belied its sinister purpose. The winding road leading to its entrance was lined with dormant trees, their gnarled branches casting spectral silhouettes. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The interior, a harmonious blend of pine wood and silk tapestries, was a silent witness to the secret dealings destined to unfold. A crackling fire cast flickers of light across the room, adding an air of theatrical foreboding. Jonas and Sarah arrived early, dressed in unassuming attire to blend with the chalet's opulence. From their vantage point in a secluded corner, they observed attendees trickling in. Among them were several key figures from the club's management and unfamiliar faces likely belonging to those consultants Alyssa mentioned. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched the gathering. If they're planning the next move, it's going to happen here. Jonas nodded, his gaze fixated on a conversation between two suits at the far end of the room. "I recognize that man. He's linked to a series of illicit financial networks." "We need solid evidence," Sarah stated, her voice resolute. "A hidden recording, something irrefutable." However, before they could devise a plan, a sudden uproar shattered the carefully maintained facade. A burly, suited man burst into the room, his face flushed with anger and anxiety. "What's the meaning of this?" he bellowed, brandishing a slip of paper, Is this your doing? You know our deal." The room fell into shocked silence as the man continued his tirade, inadvertently confirming suspicions about agreements and payoffs. Sarah's instincts surged, recognizing an opportunity amidst the chaos. She turned to Jonas with urgency. "Go, I'll cover you. We can't let this slip away." As Jonas carefully maneuvered through the thickening crowd, the weight of their endeavor hadn't felt heavier. Each step he took could unravel the conglomerate of deceit he had painstakingly uncovered, or result in his undoing. The air thrummed with tension as each moment ticked closer to revelation or ruin. As the scene within the chalet grew increasingly volatile, Jonas disappeared into its shadowy depths, guided only by the flicker of hope that they'd soon have what they desperately needed. But just as the semblance of a plan took shape, the tranquility of the mountain expanse was ruptured by the crack of gunfire, piercing through wood and shattering glass. Jonas's retreating figure paused, heart racing as confusion and terror whirled in the frigid night air. The stakes had just transformed into a deadly game of survival, where loyalty teetered on a knife's edge and truths, no matter how dark, would ultimately come to light. As chaos ensued, the cliffhanger stood, leaving lingering questions in its wake. Would the truth finally emerge from the shadows, or would it be swallowed by the very corruption they fought to expose? Chapter 11. Shadows from the Past. The Overlook Cafe was a sanctuary of warmth amidst the biting cold. Snow cascaded gently from the overcast sky, settling silently on the hill overlooking the lake, where it transformed the landscape into a wintry tapestry. Inside, the cafe bustled with hushed conversations, steaming mugs held by frostbitten hands, and the soft crackling of a wood fire in the corner. Jonas Keller, however, seemed oblivious to the cozy atmosphere. He sat by the window, his eyes scanning the snowy vista, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and anxieties about the dangerous game he was playing. Sarah Meier entered, her cheeks flushed from the cold, shaking snowflakes off her woolen coat before spotting Jonas. Her demeanor was tense but focused, a silent determination etched in her features. She slid into the seat opposite him, a hint of relief in her glance as they exchanged nods. "Find out anything new?" Jonas asked, his voice barely above a whisper, eyes flickering towards the other patrons. "I followed a lead on those missing documents," she replied, keeping her tone low. "But someone higher up has been interfering. This case is like a game of chess, and they're several moves ahead." Jonas nodded, frustration mounting. "They're always a step ahead, it seems. It's like trying to catch a shadow. Every time I think I've seized something tangible, it slips right through my fingers." "It's not just shadows we're chasing." Sarah leaned closer, her expression intense. "Someone's actively covering their tracks, and honestly, Jonas, your past. It could be the leverage they're using against you." Jonas felt a cold shiver despite the cafe's warmth. "I knew they'd eventually dig it up," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "But it was a lifetime ago. I was a stupid kid mixed up in things I didn't understand." Sarah studied him, her gaze softening. "Tell me what you can. Maybe there's a way to turn this around." Jonas hesitated. The past was a thorny ground he had long tried to leave behind. Yet he realized if there was someone he could trust, it was Sarah. He took a deep breath, choosing his words with care. "When I was younger, my family was involved with a syndicate. Nothing major, just some minor links through the family business. When my father refused to be their front, they made him pay." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt, waiting for Jonas to continue. "He cut ties entirely, but not before I got a taste of their world. That's why I'm good with numbers," Jonas admitted with a twinge of bitterness. "I saw the patterns, the way they moved money. It was mesmerizing then, terrifying now." Later, they left the cafe, the swirling snow wrapping them in a cocoon of solitude as they headed towards Jonas's apartment. The revelation was a turning point, a junction where their strategy had to adjust to outmaneuver those pulling the strings. Standing by the corkboard covered in cryptic diagrams and newspaper clippings, Jonas felt the weight of his revelations. The air in his apartment was thick with the remnants of unresolved tension. Sarah picked up one of the few photographs pinned to the board, a black and white image of a hockey team, youthful, full of hope, taken years ago. "Is this them?" Jonas nodded. "The team my father supported before, everything. It reminds me why I stayed away for so long." "But you came back." To stop them, Jonas's resolve hardened, and because leaving it alone never felt right. Sarah handed him the photo back. "These connections, someone is banking on them to keep you out of play. We need to find leverage they don't know we have." Jonas placed the photo back, his finger tracing the edges of the corkboard. "I might know someone," he said slowly, "an old contact who might still have his ear to the ground." His eyes met Sarah's, a silent understanding passing between them. "It's risky." "We've come this far, barely makes a difference," Sarah replied. Her voice was solid, grounding him. "Then let's see if ghosts from the past can help us." The night found them in the district's underground parking lot, their breath visible in the chilled air, casting momentary shadows on the concrete walls. The clandestine meeting was set with a man who had disappeared from Jonas's world years ago, someone who could provide insights into the workings of the syndicate. They waited, each minute stretching longer, the silence punctuated by the echo of their footsteps as they paced. Finally, a shadow loomed from the corner, that of a man aged beyond his years by secrets and survivals. "You must be desperate to contact me, Keller," a gravelly voice cut through the cold. The man stepped into the dim light, revealing scars that stories would whisper about. "Matteo," Jonas greeted, wariness evident, "I need information." Matteo chuckled, a humorless sound. "Still chasing those shadows I see. What makes you think I should assist?" "Because if this corruption continues, it'll rot everything it touches, including things you care about," Jonas countered, his tone unwavering. Matteo cast a glance at Sarah, assessing and calculating. "You must be the cop." "Detective Inspector," Sarah corrected, her gaze steady. "A cop with courage, that's something new." Matteo's smile was faint, almost nostalgic. "There are talks in certain circles, whispers about units moving cash again, international ties, dirty games attached to seemingly legitimate faces." Sarah leaned in. "Can you trace any of it back? Names, accounts, the sort of proof we could use?" Matteo shrugged. "I don't jeopardize my own for free, you know how this goes." Jonas exchanged a look with Sarah before stepping forward. "You give us something tangible and we'll ensure protection. Whatever you're involved in now, you don't have to be alone." Matteo looked at them, considering. "You might just be able to put truth to where it matters, but it'll be dangerous. These are dangerous people, Jonas." "Dangers become my closest companion," Jonas replied, his voice a blend of defiance and resignation. As they parted, trust was a brittle thread, but their options were dwindling. They stepped back into the night, the heaviness of decision lingering, poised on the precipice between survival and ruin. Yet within the fear, curled tightly, was hope, a flicker pushing back the encroaching shadows. Back at her precinct, Sarah faced a new dilemma. The whispers of corruption were louder now, reverberating through corridors and cryptic conversations. She sat at her desk, rifling through files that hinted at the systemic rot she was determined to expose. A shadow fell across her desk. Startled, she looked up to find Captain Reinhard, his face a mask of authority and impatience. "Meier, a word." They moved to a quieter office, Sarah's gut twisting with apprehension. Captain Reinhard closed the door, his expression impassive, respectful even, though his eyes betrayed undercurrents of unease. "Sarah, there's talk that you're chasing challenging spirits on this one." "Are you asking me to back off, sir?" Her voice was measured, yet each word was a gauntlet thrown. "The higher-ups, they are concerned about where this is headed. You're a good detective, Meier. I'd prefer if you didn't get tangled in politics that won't lead to promotion." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Promotion isn't what I'm after." "I understand, but times are shifting. You could focus on more manageable cases." She remained silent, the silence speaking volumes. Captain Reinhardt sighed, a man caught between allegiance and duty. "Just be careful, Sarah." With that, the meeting concluded, leaving Sarah resolute and deeply aware of the precariousness of her position. Her mind spun with thoughts of Jonas and Matteo, the dynamics at play, the undercurrents threatening to pull them under. It was a web of deceit she found herself intertwined within, but Sarah Meier was not one to retreat. She would confront these shadows and secrets under the cloak of night, her wits and courage the brightest allies against the encroaching night. With renewed determination, she set about forging the next phase of their plan, for secrets unravel in the stark contrast of the darkest hour, right before dawn splinters the sky into the realm of possibility and vindication. Decisions awaited, as did the ultimate showdown lurking just beyond the horizon. Chapter 12: Shadows of the Past. The wind howled fiercely, a haunting melody echoing through the sleek corridors of the ice arena. Nestled on the outskirts of Zürich, the arena sat like a futuristic fortress against the icy backdrop of Lake Zürich. Its steel and glass structure gleamed under the overcast sky, hinting at the storm brewing within its polished walls. Jonas Keller trudged down the narrow passageway beneath the Rink, his footsteps echoing, reverberating against the cold concrete. The chill seeped through his coat, a reminder of the dangers that lurked unseen. Jonas clutched a manila folder stuffed with incriminating evidence, his resolve growing with every step towards the meeting that could alter the course of his investigation. In the financial office, a symphony of numbers played out on screens, the digital tapestry that had first sparked Jonas's suspicions. He was an accountant by trade, yet recently his life had transformed into a twisted dance with shadows and secrets. His mind flickered to Sarah Meier. They had rendezvoused at the Overlook Cafe earlier, their meeting disguised by cold cups of espresso and whispered truths. She was a detective inspector with tenacity in her eyes, unyielding in her pursuit of justice. Together, they formed a brittle alliance against a system shrouded in corruption, each revelation a stepping stone toward an inevitable clash with forces far more sinister than anticipated. In the dimly lit conference room adjacent to the club's management offices, tension hung stale in the air. The space was a battlefield of egos and ambitions, where the fate of the ZSC Lions was debated by men and women whose loyalties were as slippery as the ice their team skated upon. Jonas felt the weight of scrutiny upon him, the gazes of the executives like searchlights trying to penetrate his calm exterior. A large projector screen dominated one end of the room, casting a pale glow over a sleek glass table around which the club's power players were seated. Matthias Werner, head of the club's board, towered at the far end, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. To his right was Beatrice Vogel, who wordlessly exuded a quiet menace, a necessary tactician within the club's internal strife. "Gentlemen," Matthias began, his voice carrying a timbre of authority that demanded attention, "we gather here not just to strategize for the upcoming championship, but also to address lingering concerns regarding internal matters." A murmur rippled through the room, like the hesitating breeze before a storm unleashes its fury. Jonas remained silent, aware that his next move required precision and timing. He grasped the folder tighter, feeling the embossed club logo beneath his fingers, a symbol of everything he sought to preserve from corruption's grip. "There are birds singing, naughty little birds," Beatrice remarked, her voice a silken veneer over the razor edges of her words. "Rumors of unaccounted finances and misplaced loyalties. Can we afford such distractions before a crucial match?" Heads nodded, some in acquiescence, others in veiled defiance. The dynamics were clear: fractures within management, distrust festering amidst an ocean of facades. Tobias Rein, Matthias continued, his gaze sweeping across the room once more, settling on Jonas. There's concern over his dedication, a rising star, yet one who dances precariously close to the edge. Jonas met Matthias's stare with calm determination. It was time to lay his cards on the table. Tobias is more than a player with potential. He's caught in a web much larger than himself, Jonas asserted, his voice firm. Intertwined with issues that might soon reflect on this club unless addressed. Beatrice arched an eyebrow, her interest piqued. And you have proof, Keller. Jonas placed the folder on the table, sliding it forward. Not just proof, but insights into the mechanisms destabilizing this institution, a blueprint of shadows, if you will. Matthias gestured towards the projector, and the contents of the folder spun to life, casting eerie illuminations on their captivated faces. Documents flickered against the white screen like ghosts of past misdeeds, proof of illicit betting transactions, international money trails, and Tobias's coerced involvement. As the reel of evidence unraveled before them, the room shifted from skepticism to sober realization. It was a showcase of deception, but also a clarion call to action. For Jonas and Sarah, this was a critical step toward unearthing the truth, challenging adversaries who thrived in the darkness. The Overlook Cafe was alive with the bustle of patrons seeking warmth and solace from the winter's relentless grip. Jonas and Sarah chose a secluded corner, their cups of espresso a refuge for the heated discussion to come. Beyond the frosted windows, Lake Zürich lay like a mirror of silver glass, reflecting the brewing storm clouds above. Sarah's eyes sharp. As ever scanned the room with habitual caution. "Any progress with the club meetings?" she asked, her voice low yet charged with urgency. Jonas nodded, leaning in. "Managed to present the evidence we discussed to Matthias Werner. It caught his attention, but whether it leads to action, we'll have to see." "Werner is a pivotal piece," Sarah remarked thoughtfully, tracing the rim of her cup. "If he stands on our side, it might bolster our chances of breaking through the barriers." "But we're running out of time," Jonas replied, concern etching his face. "Tobias, too. His situation is precarious." Sarah considered this and took a deep breath. He's been extensively involved with the criminal elements utilizing the betting ring. His debts bind him, so finding leverage that might compel him to testify. That's our key. Jonas ruffled a hand through his hair, a gesture of mounting frustration. His debts are just one facet. There's more at stake than his willingness to inform. We might need to employ alternative methods to ensure his cooperation. A contemplative silence enveloped them, punctuated by the aroma of brewing coffee wafting through the air. The weight of their mission settled heavily on their shoulders, an unspoken pact binding them in this perilous dance of uncovering corruption. "We should also prepare for backlash," Sarah stated wisely. "Once the wolves scent us encroaching, they'll close ranks ferocious." "We've already stirred the hornet's nest," Jonas agreed, his gaze fixed intently on the swirling patterns in his cup. "And when we uproot the cover completely, it will be a frenzy." "But the truth, Jonas, that's our weapon. It might be treacherous now, but once wielded, it's unstoppable." Her optimism was infectious, undulating around him like a beacon in the encroaching gloom. It was a fragile hope, yet enough to kindle the flame once more within his haunted heart. As darkness blanketed the chalet high in the Swiss Alps, its opulence was a stark contrast to the primal serenity of the surrounding landscape. The panoramic windows of the mountain retreat offered unhindered views of snow-capped peaks glistening under the twilight sky, a seemingly peaceful facade to the clandestine meetings transpiring within. The dim lighting in the grand room cast elongated shadows across the festive rugs, transforming the space into a theater for silent negotiations and unspoken allegiances. It was a conclave of secrecy, attended by men who moved mountains yet thrived in obscurity. Beyond the clinking of crystal glasses and murmured conversations, a lone voice rose, clear and commanding. A figure, an orchestrator amidst the cacophony, a man whose visage fell under the veil of shadow yet wielded power with ease. His words were like a serpent's hiss, laced with menace yet seductive in their allure. The matters at the ice arena escalate, and so do our concerns. Time nears for insurance, decisive execution. Whispers followed, like the rustle of silk against greed. Jonas's and Sarah's movements had not gone unnoticed, and things were in motion, a web of retaliation woven intricately to ensnare those who dared challenge them. In the corner, Tobias bided his time, the weight of his involvement pressing heavily on his conscience. The room's atmosphere was suffocating, much like the debts that coiled around him like vengeful phantoms. Here decisions were made, lives altered, and paths irrevocably forged. The glances exchanged were fleeting, communication contained in half-smiles and nods heavier with unsaid implications. Each player maneuvering for power, oblivious to, or perhaps intentionally ignorant of, the impending resolve desperate to penetrate their impermeable circle. The veneer of civility cloaked their intentions, yet the undercurrent spoke volumes. Someone would have to pay, and nothing was more certain than their unshakable consent. Beneath the moonlit sky, Jonas and Sarah stood atop a hill. The city of Zürich sprawled beneath them like a slumbering titan. Lights flickered like sentinels in the darkness, witnessing the convergence of forces that threatened to erupt. The whisper of the night exhaled a frosty breath as Jonas turned towards Sarah, determination etched deep within his gaze. Supporting Tobias into safe harbor is crucial. I need your help making sure he talks and finds refuge. This game we're playing doesn't afford mistakes. Sarah lingered on the precipice of decisions that would uncoil consequences far beyond their understanding. We risk everything. In the eye of the storm, finding solace is improbable, but we must try. The path before them unfurled, a treacherous passage yet laced with hope, a fragile lifeline in opposing darkness. Their alliance now solidified, Jonas and Sarah understood the task ahead was monumental, but not insurmountable. As they prepared for the battle, the cityscape beneath them whispered tales of triumph yet to be written. Shadows dance. Beneath Zürich's burgeoning light, promising the dawn of revelations that would herald retribution and the vindication of truth. Facing their fears, bolstered by unity, they readied themselves for the inevitable clash. Aware that deeper shadows yet lurked beyond the silver lake 60 fathoms, waiting to be unveiled by determined hearts. Chapter 13. Shadows of the Past. The wind wailed through the steel and glass facade of the ice arena, its ghostly echoes drowning in the muted roar from the stands. Snow swirled gently outside, painting the exterior white as Jonas Keller stood watching from the locker room. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of liniment, mingling with the sharpness of cold metal. He felt the familiar knot of tension tugging at his insides, but today it was intertwined with a deeper, gnawing anxiety. Around him, the players equipped themselves for the upcoming practice session. Their laughter and chatter, usually loud and boisterous, seemed subdued today, almost as if the very walls were aware of the dark undercurrents flowing beneath this place. Jonas took a deep breath, his eyes meeting briefly with Tobias Rein's. An almost imperceptible nod passed between them. "I didn't think I'd see the day where you're not wrapped up in your numbers," Tobias remarked, striding toward Jonas. His voice carried a forced lightness, a thin veneer over the worry beneath. "Change of pace," Jonas replied, trying to mirror the casual tone. "Have you ever wondered why things that should stay in the past have such a way of clawing back?" Tobias added, his gaze shifting cautiously. Jonas hesitated, the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down. "All the time," he finally said, "but sometimes confronting it is the only way to lay it to rest." Tobias nodded, his eyes darting around to ensure they were not overheard. "You've got to be careful, Jonas. They're closing in on both sides. Everyone's watching, waiting." Jonas felt the familiar heaviness settle over him. "I know," he admitted, "but it's too late to turn back now. We've started something that has to be finished." Hours later, Jonas found himself at the Overlook Cafe, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the frosty world outside. The sun hung low, setting the frozen lake aglow in shades of orange and pink. He sipped his coffee, peering through the steamed-up windows every so often, as if suspecting danger looming just beyond sight. Sarah Meier arrived, dusting flakes of snow from her coat. Her expression was tight, her eyes alert and searching. Taking the seat across from Jonas, she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've pulled the strings. My superior told me to drop the case," she revealed, frustration seeping through her controlled demeanor. Jonas expected this, yet the confirmation stung. "Are they setting you up?" Sarah nodded. "Someone high up is preventing us from moving forward, and it's more than just the club. The entire financial institution has a hand in this. We're talking layers of deception." Jonas chewed on that, feeling the stakes rise even higher. "We need the evidence, something that can't be ignored." He placed his hand on the envelope he'd been guarding closely. "I've got something. Bank statements, transaction histories, enough to wake the dead." She took the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents quickly. "This is good, but if we're not careful, they'll find a way to make it disappear," she warned grimly. "They'll try," Jonas agreed, his determination hardening, "but we have an advantage. They won't see us coming until it's too late." Their plans were interrupted by the cafe's door creaking open, letting in a gust of icy air. A shadow fell across their table, and Jonas's grip instinctively tightened around his cup. Later that evening, Jonas returned to his quiet apartment in the city center, light barely spilling from the curtained windows. The walls, usually comforting with their memorabilia, felt closing in on him. His computer hummed softly, illuminating the corkboard beside it, filled to the brim with notes, articles, and a network of string connecting ideas together, his mind mapped out in physical form. He sat heavily in his chair, staring at the spreadsheets on his screen. Names, dates, obscure references circling back to faces he now recognized. The deeper he dug, the more he unearthed pieces of his own past he wished could have stayed buried. His phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Tonight." The location was familiar, a secluded corner in the mountain chalet he once dreaded visiting. He knew what was at stake, but he also knew walking into a trap was a real possibility. Jonas glanced around his apartment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He had come this far. There was no turning back. Grabbing his coat, he stepped into the night, the cold biting his skin, echoing the chill rooted in his heart. Inside the mountain chalet, candles flickered against the dark wood-paneled walls, casting dancing shadows as Jonas entered the room. It was opulent yet suffocating, every luxury tinged with an air of foreboding. A group of men stood murmuring at the far end, their conversation hushed, but Jonas knew enough to spot power dynamics at play. "Jonas," a voice called out, echoing ominously as a figure detached from the others, moving towards him with a predatory grace. It was someone he recognized from photographs, someone who seemed to extract pleasure from control. "Your courage is admirable, but also your undoing. Some stones are best left unturned," the man warned, his tone almost conversational. Jonas met his gaze, unflinching. "That's one approach, but justice has a way of trumping silence. You should know that." The man smiled, a cold, sharp thing. "And what makes you think you've got the upper hand?" There was a pause, a moment suspended with unspoken threats. "Because the truth's already out," Jonas said quietly, his words unwavering despite the danger looming large. "And its momentum is greater than you can handle." Their standoff was interrupted by sudden movement, a commotion as whispers turned urgent. Jonas knew his timing was precarious, but if he ever needed a diversion, this was it. In the chaos, he slipped away, his heart thundering as he made a hasty retreat, the night swallowing him whole as he disappeared into the snowfall. Tonight would decide their fate, he realized. In this deadly game of revelations, whose hand held the stronger cards was yet to be determined. With each passing moment, closer to facing the twisting corridors of corruption, each step felt heavier yet more inevitable. Jonas understood one thing: crossing paths with protagonists of deception meant they were always playing catch-up, but the game was far from over. Meeting with Sarah again as dawn broke, he felt the tremors of anticipation give way to a resolve steeled by more than just determination. It was hope. "Did it work?" she asked, weary but hopeful. "Only time will tell," Jonas replied. "We've lit the fuse, now we see where it takes us." The horizon stretched before them, a scene calm and yet deceitfully poignant. Amidst this treacherous gamble for truth and righteousness, the chapters of their own stories carved deeper, casting shadows yet to be unveiled. In this unpredictable symphony of shadows and light, Jonas knew the final act was close, perhaps closer than either of them expected. With the machinery of fate in motion, every deception, lie, and truth would rise to the surface when least expected. If he had learned anything as an accountant digging through messy details, it was that eventually, every hidden figure must reveal itself. And in that revelation, they would guide themselves out of the shadows they both had unknowingly walked into. The stakes had never been higher, nor the outcome more uncertain. But sometimes, uncertainty was all they needed for the final unraveling of whatever lay ahead. Chapter 14: The Unraveling Shadows. The icy wind whipped through the sleek streets of Zürich's business district, a dizzying waltz of snowflakes in the cold twilight. The mirrored facades of towering buildings twinkled with the reflections of streetlights in the early evening. The pulse of the city felt both familiar and foreign to Jonas Keller, who stood cloaked in a heavy coat, hands buried deep in his pockets against the biting chill. Inside the cafe overlooking the sprawling vista of Lake Zürich, warmth greeted him like an old friend. The Overlook Cafe was bustling, filled with locals seeking respite from the cold. Jonas chose a table by the window, his gaze drawn to the mesmerizing view of the frozen lake, as if its icy surface could offer some clarity to his troubled mind. "Jonas," Sarah Meier's voice broke through his thoughts as she slid into the seat across from him, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "Any news?" Jonas shook his head, his eyes clouded with fatigue. "They've stepped up their game. My computer was hacked again last night. Whoever is behind this, they're not amateurs." Sarah nodded, her jaw set in defiance. "I've been receiving pressure from above to drop the investigation. It seems like everyone has their fingers in this pie." "Then they must be getting nervous," Jonas mused. He leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I managed to decrypt some files. There's a direct link between the club's management and offshore accounts. It's bigger than I thought." Sarah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she digested the information. "This is about more than just a betting ring. It's money laundering on an international scale." Jonas nodded gravely. "And Tobias, there's definitely more to his involvement. We need to talk to him before they tighten their grip." A pause stretched between them, tension thick in the air. Outside, the winter night crept across the city, draping it in anticipation of the storm that was to come. In the locker room beneath the shimmering ice arena, tension veiled the air like a dense fog. Tobias Rein sat on the bench, deep in thought, his gear half-strapped in a lackluster effort. The silent echoes of skates carving the ice above reverberated through the concrete walls, each scrape a jarring reminder of the performance expected of him in the upcoming match. "Tobias," Jonas's voice echoed in the nearly deserted room, accompanied by the hollow clack of his shoes on the tiled floor. "I didn't think I'd find you here alone." Tobias shrugged, eyes fixed on his skates, needed some time to think. Jonas sat beside him, a reassuring presence in the gathering storm. I know things haven't been easy, but I need to understand what's happening. Tobias hesitated, his grip tightening around the laces. It's complicated, Jonas. I felt like I lost control, but I never wanted to be part of this. I needed the money. Those debts, I couldn't see a way out. There was a vulnerability in Tobias's voice, a crack through which his genuine fear seeped. Jonas placed a hand on his shoulder. You can help us. You're not alone in this. These people, they're playing a dangerous game. Tobias's eyes met Jonas's, a spark of determination igniting within them. They want me to throw the game, but the others, they mustn't know. If I don't, they'll come after my family. Jonas absorbed the weight of Tobias's confession, the room echoing the silent understanding between them. We can protect you, but we need you to stand with us. Will you? A beat of silence, then a firm nod. I will, but promise me we do it in a way that keeps my family safe. Jonas nodded, their partnership cemented by unspoken trust. The mountain chalet stood alone amidst the swirling snow, a monolith of glass and stone set against the brooding backdrop of the Swiss Alps. Inside, the ambience was hushed, punctuated only by the crackling fire that flared in the hearth. Soft lights reflected off the wooden panels, casting long shadows on the opulent rugs. Sarah moved stealthily through the shadows, her nerves taut with tension. She had arranged to meet her insider here, far from prying eyes and ears. The whisper of footsteps preceded the arrival of a shadowy figure, their face obscured beneath a hood. You came, the figure murmured, their voice barely rising above the fire's gentle crackle. Of course, Sarah replied, her tone laced with urgency. What do you have for me? The figure withdrew a document from their coat, sliding it across the polished wooden table. Evidence of the transactions, a clear trail leading to the top. Sarah scanned the files, her pulse quickening as the pieces fell into place. This is enough to take them down. But you must move quickly, the figure warned. They know I'm leaking information. They won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. Sarah met their gaze, the flickering fire mirrored in her steely resolve. We've come too far to. Back down now, thank you. I'll make sure your risk was worth it. As the figure faded back into the shadows, Sarah folded the document securely. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. With renewed determination, she stepped out into the storm, ready to face whatever demons lay ahead. As the night deepened, the Zürich ice arena became a storm of anticipation. Fans huddled together in their seats, their breath misting in the chilled air. Above, the looming skyboxes glittered with the promise of luxury and power. Jonas moved through the bustling corridors, his heart a steady drum of resolve. The game was moments away, and with it, the echoes of a reckoning long overdue. Tobias stood at the edge of the rink, clad in his gear, an island of focused calm amid the swirling tensions around him. As the announcer's voice rolled through the stadium, the players charged onto the ice, a cascade of vibrant jerseys and flashing blades. Jonas, Sarah's presence at his side, was both a comfort and a war drum. This is it. I've got everything ready. The authorities will act as soon as the evidence is made public. Jonas exhaled, nodding. It's down to Tobias now. The puck dropped amid a roar of cheers, players colliding with the force of trained gladiators. Eyes darted across the action, fears and hopes mingling with every shot fired and saved. Do you think he'll follow through? Sarah asked, worry threading her voice. He will, Jonas replied confidently. He has to. As play continued, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Each pass, each maneuver on the ice was a battle, both in the arena and beyond its walls. Jonas watched, his breath caught in his chest as Tobias seized the puck, deftly navigating the vanguard of opposing players. Time seemed to slow, a singular moment suspended in the crisp air. Tobias moved with a fluidity born from both desperation and talent, his stick a conductor directing a symphony of determination. And then, as if he'd always known his fate, Tobias struck, the puck flying true, snapping into the welcoming net. The arena erupted, a celebration shaking its foundations. Yet in the midst of triumph, Tobias skated towards the stands, eyes fixed on Jonas and Sarah, who nodded in solidarity. Jonas knew the battle was far from over, but at that moment, there was victory in knowing that the first step had been taken. The shadows were beginning to unravel, but with them, the promise of something brighter loomed. As the cheers persisted, so too did the resolve in Jonas and Sarah's hearts. United in their quest, they had set the wheels of justice into motion. Whatever the cost, the truth was a force that would not be silenced. In the echoing aftermath of the game, amidst the detritus of celebration, Jonas and Sarah stood together, their breaths mingling in the chill of the corridor. The path ahead may still be fraught with danger, but in those shared moments of resolve, they found both strength and hope. "We can't stop now," Sarah said, determination lighting her eyes. Jonas nodded. "No, we press on together." And together, they stepped forward into the uncertain future, their steps echoing with the promise of justice yet to come. Chapter 15. The ice cracks beneath. The ice arena felt different today. The chill in the air had a sharpness to it, a sting that seemed to pierce through the man-made cold of the rink, as if the very building was holding its breath, anticipating something significant. The great steel and glass facade gleamed under the bleak winter sun, refracting shards of light that danced across the frozen surface inside where the ZSC Lions trained. The shouts of players and the scrape of skates echoed in the vast space, an ambience both vibrant and ominously oppressive. Beneath this activity, in secret corners, much darker dealings were whispered. Jonas Keller stood at the edge of the rink, his eyes locked on the intense practice happening before him. Yet, his mind was a torrent of thoughts, each one crashing against the next, the storm of confusion swirling around the latest revelations of his investigation. Somewhere within this roaring chaos, the voice of Detective Inspector Sarah Meier demanded attention, clarity amidst the chaos. "Jonas," her voice reached him above the din, a lifeline pulling him back to the present. He turned to face her, noting the grim determination in her eyes, a match set with his own visage reflected in her aviator sunglasses. Sarah moved to stand alongside him, her presence a blend of professional composure and underlying frustration. "We need to talk," she said, her tone brooking no argument. They found a secluded spot beneath the bleachers, away from prying eyes and ears. Jonas looked around cautiously, an ingrained habit now more than ever necessary. The cavernous space was filled with shadows, the occasional hum of equipment punctuating the silence. "More evidence has disappeared from the precinct," Sarah informed him, crossing her arms tightly as if to hold in her growing anger. "Every step we make, they find a way to counter." Jonas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of helplessness as much as thought. "I expected they'd meddle," he confessed. "The stakes are too high for our adversaries to play it safe." "We must be missing something," Sarah mused. "A piece of the puzzle they can't afford to let us see. Jonas, do you have anything more we can use? Anything we haven't looked at yet?" Jonas hesitated, the weight of his next decision pressing heavily upon him. The corkboard in his apartment, covered in his meticulous notes and connections, held a potentially explosive truth, one he hadn't yet dared to share. "There's something," he said at last, meeting Sarah's eyes squarely. "But it's dangerous, more than what we've already unearthed." Her gaze never wavered. "Danger is an old friend, show me." The Overlook Cafe had become their secret haven, a place where conspiracies could be swapped over steaming mugs of coffee, where the outside world paused in its hold. Set against the placid view of Lake Zürich, its frozen surface appeared serene, but betrayed nothing of the turbulence underneath, much like their investigation. "Look at this," Jonas urged, unrolling a series of documents across their shared table. The morning crowd was thin, granting them relative privacy amidst the cozy ambience of clinking cutlery and soft conversation. Sarah spread the pages out carefully. Each was a snapshot of financial transactions that spoke of corruption so deeply integrated it was as if the club itself had been built upon it. "What am I seeing?" "Fake consultancy fees funneled through third-party companies," Jonas explained, tapping the document. "These companies are offshoots of firms owned by key management figures. It all loops back." "This is a smoking gun," Sarah breathed, her eyes widening as she absorbed the information. "But how do we present it without losing it again?" Jonas paused, considering the implications. "We need it to all fall apart at once. During the final match, all eyes will be on the Lions. If we make our move then." The idea hung in the air, the audacity of it electric, crackling between them. "It's risky," Sarah admitted, though her thoughts turned over the potential success of such a plan. If they played it right, if everything fell into place. "Risk is our currency," Jonas said, his mind made up. "We've come this far, I'm not turning back now." Back at the ice arena, another layer of the city breathed around the championship preparations. The energy transformed the rink into a hive of orchestrated chaos, everything meticulously timed and placed. Yet everywhere Jonas looked, the elegance was roiling with hidden intent. Tobias Rein, the young rising star caught in the web of deceit, was hard at his exercises on the ice. Jonas could see the struggle within him, the internal conflict manifesting in each powerful stroke and spin across the rink's surface. The weight of secrets clung to his form like a second shadow. Tobias skated over to the edge, panting, his expression lined with more than just physical exertion. "Keller," he addressed Jonas, FL. Ichors of desperation playing across his features. There was no doubting the importance of this moment. "Tobias, we can still turn this around," Jonas assured him, hoping the conviction in his voice would transfer to the younger man. "Help us, and we can protect you from them." Tobias snorted, a sound more tired than derisive. "You make it sound simple." "I know it's not, but backing off now will only bury us deeper. This path ends or it consumes everything." Jonas sighed, understanding the fear that kept Tobias bound in silence, a puppet for those who pulled his strings with debts and threats. A silence settled between them, filled with the ambience of the arena, the distant echoes of a game they both loved, now tainted. Tobias finally nodded, a small, resolute dip of his head. "I'll do it." The agreement was more than words. It was a promise, an unspoken commitment between two who had found common cause against a tidal wave of corruption. It was hope. As preparations continued throughout the day for the night's match, winds of change battered the ice-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps. Within the mountain chalet, a different game was being played, where the stakes were life itself. Here, plans were laid not in terms of athletic prowess but of power and survival. Inside, the ambience was contrary to the cold chaos outside. It was plush and decadent, warm firelight dancing over leather and mahogany. Men of influence gathered in cloistered huddles, their whispers sharp and decisive. On a polished walnut table lay the latest in high-tech surveillance equipment, eerily out of place in the rustic charm of the chalet. It was a reminder of the reach and ruthlessness held by those worn down by games of finance and flesh, rather than ice and sport. Tonight, everything must go flawlessly. The voice of the man in charge was low, yet its undercurrent brooked no disobedience. He was a shadow even within the power structures of the club, his very existence a tightly held secret by a cadre who traded in faceless influence. He toyed with a game piece, a king from an elaborate chess set on the sideboard. Tonight, both board and players would find themselves amidst a critical juncture. Every move, calculated and countered, hung on the teetering edge of the chessman's fingertips. The unknown piece being Tobias, used for controlling Jonas, whispered a different kind of anxiety through the room. Outside, the wind howled stronger, an ancient, unsettled sound that promised to strip the mountain moorings before the night was through. Little did they know, a storm of their own creation was about to swallow them whole, driven by a pair destined to rewrite the narrative of power paired with deception. As the city lights flickered to life against the encroaching twilight, Jonas and Sarah prepared for the night ahead. The championship match, the culmination of the fight waged both in arenas and under the table, was upon them. Every pawn, knight, and rook was in place, and the queen poised to challenge her fate. It was time to call checkmate. Jonas arrived early, ingratiating himself silently amongst the officials and dignitaries congregating inside the luxurious enclosures. Sarah, meanwhile, melded into the stands, a ghost amidst the cheering faithful ready to witness a showdown they would soon not forget. The ice glittered with predatory beauty, an apt setting for the truths waiting to surface, for deeds to be laid bare. The very arena seemed pregnant with possibilities, the thick anticipation providing a bass note to the infinitely complex symphony of the proceedings of the night. A single whistle cut through the cold air and the puck dropped. The game unfurled, its energy contagious, a breathtaking dance of skill and strategy, but soon all eyes would shift, drawn by the invisible strings Jonas and Sarah now pulled. "The board waits," Jonas murmured to no one in particular, the words slipping into the frosty air, a talisman against the pressures ahead. Tonight, the ice would indeed crack underneath, unraveling a corrupted empire with one lethal glide. For beneath the game lay the gambit that would decide it all, justice for wrongs hidden both in shadow and on the ice. The pieces moved, and the endgame loomed ever closer.